Hello everybody, and gotta go up this mount right here just to give you guys some perspective of where I am. Take a look at everything that is surrounding me, right? It's all, well, apart from the greenery, there's a lot of stone right here. And this is sandstone. It is pretty much the only natural resource of where I am right now. I'm actually in Malta. So I'm actually spending New Year's here with my family, and it's my very first time to actually be here. It's a couple of days before New Year's, so before the holiday starts, where literally there is no work. Gotta get in those tours so I can get you to that vlog. Okay, first things first, we're going on a private walking tour. So where does it all begin? So have you guys ever heard of the Knights of St John, or the Knights of Malta, or the Knights of the Order of St John, or the Knights of the Order of Malta? It's the same thing. Okay, so have you guys ever heard of the Ottomans or the Ottoman Empire? Well, Turkey today, or Turks, used to be the Ottomans. Now, you know, an age-old war has always been about religions. Now, the Ottomans did not like Christianity. And so the ones who were, I think they were the Knights of Jerusalem, which eventually became the Knights of Rhodes. It's basically where they're from. And they were banished by the Ottomans. And then the Ottomans were like, we're sending you off to Malta. And then so the Knights of St. John were here, and they were like, but there's nothing here. It's just all sandstone. What are we going to do here? But unfortunately, they were like, you know what? Beggars can't be choosers. We're just going to make do with what we've got. And so this is where they situated themselves. And of course, it didn't look all like this, where it's like paved and it looks like a fortification, which it is. Well, how that happened is they thought, okay, so we're right in the center of where the trading route is. In fact, when we were flying and then like entering to the airport, you can actually see all these ships, trading docks and whatnot, the port. And so it kind of gives you an idea from way back then, like 1530. So just imagine 1530, when they were all here, this was nothing. And then of course, they're now prone to the attack of the enemy. And that's exactly what happened. So the Ottomans tried to attack, but successfully they didn't win. And then they thought, you know what, this can't happen again. And because they were Christians, they then said, why don't we get some, you know, like additional support from the Pope, and then, you know, help us build like a fortress. And that's what they did. So the Pope then sent their best architect, which is what this garden is named after. And it was here that they were able to build and dig down, because look, from high up there to down here, that's all like with a carving and all that effort, they were able to make it the strong fortification that it is today. And so that is where we begin. And then now, where do they actually situate themselves? As you would know, wherever you are, whenever it comes to safety, when you're on land, you always got to go to the highest, and that is in Valletta. And Valletta is actually the capital of Malta. And so now, as you can see, we're working our way up. Honestly, I don't know what we're gonna expect today, but I hope you guys enjoy the vlog. Let's see where this goes. Here we go. Alrighty, so we've actually made it to the very top of the stairs, and you actually see here, all around me is actually the entrance to the fortress, or the fortification city or whatnot. And that behind me is actually Triton. You know, like Triton from like Little Mermaid? Yes, so of course, like Greek mythology. So you see these two, like 1 and 2. So they're both actually looking out into the water. And basically it's just to show that, because right here Valletta is like a peninsula, and then it's surrounded by other 2 islands, or 2 harbors, I think. And so that pretty much represents that. And then if you see right below me here on the ground, quite new compared to what an ancient city is supposed to look like. So in 2018, Malta was considered European City of Culture for 2018. So of course, with that, they were able to get funds to refurbish the whole city, and voila. Did you know that this actually used to be a bus terminal? So you see, if this was a round fountain, imagine like a rotunda, and people are going around for the bus terminal to actually enter the entrance right there. Okay, which is actually where we're going right now. Okay, so that's the entrance right there, and it actually has a megalithic, I just learned that word today, architecture. Now, because I told you guys that they had actually spent all this money into investing into sort of like refurbishing the city, obviously that means that not everybody is going to be happy, let's just say, with the changes that were made. Case in point, this is actually the Parliament building. And of course, the architect, even if they already started building this in 2014, the locals actually did not like it at all because apparently like Valletta is predominantly Baroque. Now this is actually quite modern to contemporary, but then the architect was actually saying no. In my defense, if you think about it, like the sandstone, like the color, it's still reminiscent of the city, and then because of the entrance, it's still megalithic, and then at the same time, you see like all these panels right here, it's actually inspired by honey. So honey is actually very popular here in Malta. You know, it's supposed to replicate like a beehive, if you will. So whether you like it or not, I think it makes it interesting because it's really such a synergy of what's old and new contrasting. Definitely a conversation starter. Okay, and then this one to the left hand side is actually the former Royal Opera House. And former meaning because I'm flashing the photo right now of what it used to look like. Really beautiful, really ornate. Unlike now, you see a lot of scaffolding and you think it's actually unfinished. No, because it was damaged in the war, they had decided we're just gonna make it like an open type concert venue. And there's still a debate as to whether like to keep it this way or to actually revamp it to the way it was. Yeah, a lot of politics. So earlier I told you, I was mentioning to you guys, right, that the people from the Order of St. John, they had thought we need to build a city. We need funds to actually build ourselves like community, a city, a fortress, basically to protect ourselves from pirates. Because yes, back then pirates were a thing. The Pope actually gave permission that you could be a pirate who was licensed to kill invaders, aka Ottomans and whatnot. So the Pope had actually sent this guy named Francesco Laparelli. So it was actually him together with his apprentice or a master builder, I think, and they had helped like construct the city or rather design the city. So you can actually see in the base of the structure right here, like it's a grid, and the way that the city was actually designed in grid form. And then when Laparelli died, his assistant, I believe his name is Girolamo Casari. So he actually continued this work, and this structure was actually built in commemoration of them. So this guy over here, his name Grand Master de Valletta, and then they added an A to name the capital of Malta, Valletta, literally like it's named after. So Grand Master, I learned he's not the president, but he is a leader. Valletta was actually the one who was working with Laparelli when they were designing the grid action right here that you see as the architecture, basically designing the whole city. So this guy, he was actually apparently really, really smart. He knew like several languages, even up to a point where he was actually captured by the enemy. He was actually able to learn their language and then sort of like manipulate them and whatnot. And so yes, once upon a time he was captured and then he escaped. And the point is, he's a really important person, folks. Valletta, Grand Master. Now originally he was actually buried in this church right here, and that is called Our Lady of Victory. So initially Grand Master Valletta's body was actually buried here, and then eventually it was transferred to where all the other Grand Masters are. Now this church right across it is called Church of St. Catherine, and at first I said, oh, Santa Caterina de Siena. No, it's of Alexandria, so it's another St. Catherine. So it's actually the patron saint of Italy. Okay, so we are talking about like the Knights of St. John. So technically, Knights of St. John or the Order of Malta, God, so many names. It's actually a religious order, right? I mean, that's why they're able to get the funds and support from the Pope. So this church right here, it's sort of was like a way to congregate and bring all the knights together who are all basically different nationalities traveling to Malta from all over the world. That served as sort of like a convent slash like seminary for them to all to come together. So again, continuing with our walking tour, and we come to this building right here that is quite lovely, which is a stark contrast from the building that we see right beside. So originally, this used to look like this. And you must be wondering, so how did it become like that? So do you see this guy right at the top? He's actually another Grand Master, but this time from the 18th century. His name is actually Grand Master Pinto. And it's funny because the word Pinto actually means door in Tagalog, in my native language in the Philippines. And look, he's literally above a door. Okay, so he was actually quite flamboyant. You know, he was very ostentatious. He was a very fashionable guy. And he also, of course, wanted to show off to everybody, like, look what I can do under my leadership. So what he did with whatever funds that he had, he actually like demolished this building and then redid everything to make it look this pretty, if you will. Now this building right here is basically called an auberge. Now an auberge, I'm learning, is basically like I said, the order of St. John. They were all it was a religious order, and what would these people do apart from spreading the word of God? They actually worked as volunteers, like in a hospital, and just basically all these other works of charity and of mercy. And so all those knights who travel from all different parts of the world, who could actually stay at that church that you saw right there, they actually needed a place to stay, quarters. And this is actually where they stayed, with all those different nationalities, all those different languages. And yeah, this was sort of like their headquarters, if you will. And it was actually built by that guy, Grand Master Pinto. So we're here right now, so it's basically overlooking the harbor, and it is just absolutely stunning. Look at that. So because we are surrounded by so much water, you can imagine, like, a lot of pirates, a lot of like enemies would want to pounce right here on Malta. And you see those cannons right there. Apparently they're fired every Sunday, but it just goes to show, again, fortification, protecting from the enemy. And if you can see, because we are above, this was the most ideal place to protect us from the enemies, and hence they actually constructed the capital city here in Valletta. And then you see this part right here. So the Order of St. John actually situated themselves for the very first time right over there. I believe it's called Barrakka. And then where is it? That actually is the largest fortification here in Malta, but it is also one of the most famous, I guess, one of the most, how do I say, it's pretty much become a film town. You have like The Gladiator, you have like Troy, so imagine like Brad Pitt was here. But this right here, do you know that Game of Thrones was actually filmed here as well? So much stuff has happened here all around the harbor, and yeah, now you know. So we're walking right now. So I was talking about auberge. So because there were many knights from all parts of the world, and they had different religions, so obviously kind of cliquish, so there was a different like auberge for every group, like this one. This is the Auberge d'Italie. So I reckon it's the Italian knights who actually stayed here. But what's more important about every auberge is, you see that right there? So it's like you know how like all these orders, these families, they all have these like different crests, and it's sort of like the symbol, or sort of like the signature stamp of the auberge, and the person who built it, I reckon, is the Grand Master. So that was always the most important thing, because every design, every article, every aspect of the design actually means something. But anyway, this is actually already like a museum of arts, and then this is actually another auberge. Now the auberge that I showed you earlier, actually in the right-hand side corner, or the left-hand side corner if you're actually looking at the building, is actually where the Prime Minister currently stays. I forgot to film that, but just so you know. Now, this auberge right here, once upon a time, Napoleon Bonaparte actually stayed here as well. But now it is the office of the Prime Minister. Huh, there you go. We moved to another auberge, and you know, if there's one thing I am proud to be as a Filipino is no matter in the world, you are going to find us in the service industry, in the hospitality industry, especially as volunteers in the church. Every time you feel like you're lost in the city and you're Filipino, just go to any church. You're bound to find one Filipino right there who's singing the choir, who's part of like in the rectory, or who's like reading like the gospel or something. So this is another auberge. And earlier we saw that was one from Portugal. The other one is from Italy. This one I forget, but the point is it was converted, and now this is where the congregation of the Filipino community go. So this is actually for St. James. So St. James Catholic Church, hi. So is actually one of the apostles of Christ. So it's actually, you can see, there's like Tagalog in the signs, Banal na Misa, which is basically Holy Mass. And yeah, and that is our Philippine flag. I love that. So it's actually nice to see that, you know, we got St. James representing, and also representing, we are in the middle of this busy street right now. I reckon is a main street, and I reckon there's shops on the side. There's like restaurants, and people are having like a drink or two, which is quite nice. So do you see this right over here? So when British sailors were actually here, this was actually quite popular because they would do this bet that if a sailor could actually find and make their way through this hole, they would get a promotion. How the hell would you do that? Look how tiny that is. Jesus, you would have to be a contortionist to pass through that. But what's even more interesting is you see this right there. I actually thought it was like where a statue was erected, or maybe like a fountain. But no, it's a different kind of statue that was erected there. It was actually meant for prisoners. Back in the day, that was actually used for prisoners. And you would see like the hook right there. That's where they would be tied, their hands in the back, to show everybody that if you try and do anything bad, this is going to happen to you. You know how they say never judge a book by its cover? Because when you take a look at this church, it looks utterly simple. It is actually the church of St. John's Co-Cathedral. Apparently this is like the most, in terms of architecture, the most important church here in Valletta, because on the outside it's actually quite simple, but on the inside it actually has really remarkable, beautiful Baroque architecture on the inside. So initially, like, it actually was built like this, very simple, white walls and all that. I think 100 years later, after this was built, a certain Grand Master, I think they were brothers or they were partners, and they decided to fund the interiors of this church to, you know, like revamp it and make it their own ostentatious style. So right now there's actually a show that's happening here in the Piazza Regina, but right behind this screen right here is actually a statue of, if you know who she is Queen Victoria. So you guys saw Queen Victoria at the back. So technically the British didn't colonize Malta. However, I mentioned to you earlier about Napoleon Bonaparte staying at one of the auberges, right? It's because I think for 2 years there's a lot of political unrest because the French were pretty much like bullying. So the locals were actually, they asked help from Queen Victoria and said, please, can you actually like send your people so that sort of like let them know that they can't mess with us, sort of. So yeah, so it's sort of like calling the big brother for help. And so that's why the British were actually here. And to commemorate the help that the British did to Malta, they erected that statue of Queen Victoria. And this, as the sun is shining so brightly, this is St. George's Square. Yeah. Obviously, there's going to be something big happening because in just a few days, I think, no, it's actually December 29 right now. So in just in two days, there's going to be a big celebration for New Year's Eve. And it is exactly where the presidential palace is actually situated. It's right behind me. So earlier, you saw that building right at the front where the emblem, if you will, of Grand Master Pinto was. So that's actually a newer building. This is the original building where the parliament used to meet. But what makes this more interesting, basically they call this like the building, not because of the people in it, but because of its architecture. So just imagine, just like every politician, as they come into power and they live here, obviously they got to put their own personal twist or spin to it, sort of like their own signature that they were here. So in the very beginning, let's say everything was plain, and then one Grand Master, let's say, added these pillars, and then another Grand Master, let's say, added something else. But what was really revolutionary are these covered balconies right here. So this is actually the very first covered balcony here in Malta, and because it was such a hit architecturally, you can see actually a lot of buildings right beside that actually have this covered balcony concept. So it's basically a balcony that's covered. Get it? Yes. What I'm quite impressed regarding like an old city, it's actually quite clean. Yeah, I haven't really seen like garbage anywhere being littered on the streets, which I love, you know? And if you look at the architecture, I mean, everything kind of looks like ruins and old, and yet everything is so clean. Spectacular. Love me, my Filipino community. So we just passed by Yum, which is actually a Filipino restaurant. So yeah, Philippines, wherever you throw us in the world, we find a way to situate ourselves and make us part of that culture and that country. And if evidently here in Malta, fantastic. Ooh. See, that's the thing about a private walking tour. Our private tour, you are given a set amount of time, but because in our case I'm vlogging, we're chatting, we don't always get to follow the time as much as we like to, and we end up paying overtime because guys, you can see everything I'm doing is usually just one take, and that's me listening and then have to film and considering I'm doing it at a very fast pace and taking information and sharing information at the same time in one breath at the fastest pace that I can, it still is a very limited time. So I'm not going to say that if you want to be a vlogger, expect this, but I will say that I am really trying as a vlogger to share as much information as I can. And if you know this, if sometimes you're just seeing my face and you don't actually see the scenery, it's because I can only do so much, like filming and then retaining all that information and then taking what's around me. So it really is like an adrenaline-filled hobby. Amazing race, if you will.